Hello, APUSH children. Welcome to the second part of our notes for Chapter 29. This is about the Vietnam War. Let's get started. So let me give you an overview of this war. It's the second longest war in American history, the longest being the war in Afghanistan that we're currently in today. The numbers, when they came back, there were 58,000 soldiers that were killed in action and 300,000 wounded. 14,000 came back completely disabled. Usually somehow losing a limb is the most common disability that soldiers had when they came back. Also, 800,000 Vietnam soldiers experienced post-traumatic stress syndrome or some type of mental disability after fighting this war. So what happened to the Vietnamese? Well, by the end of the war, 2 million were killed, 4 million had been wounded, and 10 million were displaced from their homes. So when people were asked about the Vietnam War in the United States, the results were pretty negative. 2 out of every 3 Americans felt that our involvement in the Vietnam War had been a mistake. Over 50% don't really have a clear idea of why we even got involved in the war. 1/3 of Americans who were surveyed don't even know which side we supported, which, as you know, we supported the South. And 50% of Americans don't even know where Vietnam is located on a map. That's pretty sad. Think about the election of 1960. Why was it such a big deal? Well, because it was the first televised election ever in American history. So that also goes along with the Vietnam War. It was known as the first living room war, where people actually were able to watch what was going on, actual footage from the war. Why is this so significant? Well, if you think about it, people were actually getting images of what was going on the fronts rather than just hearing from the government that everything was okay and things were progressing. And they realized by watching this that it really wasn't working out that way. So what are some other little factoids about the war before I actually get into the chronology of it? 76% of the men fighting in the war were either from lower or middle class families. And if you ever have heard the song Fortunate Son by Creedence Clearwater Revival, or CCR, you'll know what I'm talking about. That song protested against this. If you haven't heard it, you should. It's really good. The average age of a soldier was 19 years old, and we're going to see later that this is why the 26th Amendment got passed. Most soldiers were drafted, very few enlisted on their own, so that just tells you right there that the people fighting in this war were doing it against their will. And the average tour of duty for a soldier typically was 1 year. A few more factoids for you about the Vietnam War. 7 presidents had some type of involvement from the Vietnam War, from Truman all the way to Carter. Music clearly proved how divided the country was. There was about a few protest songs that were for the war, but most of the songs were against the war. Some of the biggest musicians that wrote songs that were against the war included Bob Dylan and Joe Baez. Soldiers also invented their own vocabulary in the war, and as you can see on your supplemental packet, you will see that in the Vietnam terminology. Let me give you a little background information about this war. Before the war started, Vietnam used to be part of French Indochina, which meant it was a French colony. Well, during World War II, it got taken over by the Japanese, but then when the Japanese lost World War II, the French went in after it again. The leader that tried to fight against and successfully fought against the French was Ho Chi Minh. He was the leader of the North, and he supported communism. So in 1945, the French did go back to try to gain control of Vietnam. Ho Chi Minh controlled North Vietnam and was getting aid from China, and France was getting aided by the United States. And we actually footed the bill for about 75 to 80% of their war in the name of containment. So again, we did this in the name of containment. That was Truman's policy of the idea that America should resist further expansion of communism around the world by trying to stop it from spreading, and that was what he felt with Vietnam, why we had to aid the French. Eisenhower took it one step further. He kind of tweaked the idea of containment and called it the domino theory, which basically is the idea of if one country falls to communism, the countries around it are going to fall. So he felt that we had to save Vietnam because, first it was the USSR, then China, then North Korea, now it's going to be North Vietnam, and he was assuming that the rest of Indochina was going to fall to communism if we didn't stop it. So at the time of the French Indochina War, this is what Vietnam looked like. It was all one country. The capital was Hanoi, which is in the north. And if you look at the very bottom of the map where it says Ho Chi Minh City, that is the city of Saigon, which we'll be talking about later. If you look at this map, this is a map of Indochina, this whole area. And again, going with what I talked about, Eisenhower, he was afraid of the domino theory, that if all of Vietnam fell to communism, China just had fallen, now Vietnam, he was worried it was going to spill over into Laos and Cambodia. So, like in most wars, France is losing, so they asked for more of our help. In 1954, they proposed the plan Operation Vulture, where they asked the United States to drop the atomic bomb on North Vietnam, and the United States says, no, we're not doing that. Eisenhower says no. So in May 1954, Dien Bien Phu, in that area, France holds it for 50 days, but then eventually it falls to Ho Chi Minh and his men. And this is the major turning point of the French Indochina War, because from here on out, the French are on the defensive, and they are going to lose and eventually pull out of this war. So the poor French, they lose another war. They're about 1 for 300,000 on wins versus losses when it comes to wars. In July of 1954, they and the Americans and the Vietnamese meet in Geneva to create the Geneva Accords, which is basically decide how to divide up Vietnam once the war is over. So at the 17th parallel, they divide Vietnam into the northern part and the southern part, two separate countries. In the north, it is led by Ho Chi Minh, and it is a communist state. In the south, it's up for grabs. And this is who we try to go after, to try to help them become more of a republic like us and not fall to communism like the north. So we weren't involved until this official war. It didn't escalate until about 1964 at the Gulf of Tonkin, but we had been there since the 1940s, and our first casualty of this war was Lieutenant Colonel Peter Dewey. He was a member of the OSS, which is like our former CIA, and he had actually warned in letters before we got over there that we should not get involved in this and just leave it alone. So it's a little bit of foreshadowing of someone who was right about 30 years before this war ended. We're going to look at the two leaders of Vietnam right now. First, let's look at the North. Let's look at Ho Chi Minh. He was the leader of North Vietnam. He brought communism to the area. He also had a lot of supporters in South Vietnam who looked to him to be a leader, and we're going to look later, that's the VC or the Viet Cong. Why was he such a hero? Because he took large estates and broke them up and gave land to the peasants, but he was also the guy that drove the French out of the country. So put yourselves in the shoes of the Vietnamese. You're probably going to like this guy because you've been controlled by people from far, far away that don't know anything about your culture, and this guy led you to a revolution to throw those people out of your country. So let's look at the other leader, Ngo Dinh Diem. He is the leader of the South that was placed into office by the United States. He was Catholic, so we're like, yay, he's kind of like us, might as well throw him into office, he should be good. But he wasn't good. He reneged on a lot of things that he promised the United States he would do, like, for instance, free elections. He also allowed for a corrupt government and suppressed any type of opposition in brutal ways. In addition, he offered little or no help or land to any of the peasants, so he was hurting the poor. Okay, so remember how I told you how Diem is Catholic? Well, he uses his power as being a Catholic to try to suppress Buddhists at the time. He pretty much restricts any Buddhist practice in South Vietnam, and anybody who does practice Buddhism either gets arrested or even killed. Oh, we got trouble. Right near Ho Chi Minh City. With a capital V that rhymes with C that stands for Viet Cong, which stands for Viet Cong. So, Viet Cong, those are the VC, they support the North. They are South Vietnamese guerrillas, and they are the ones that we are going to be fighting against, have the biggest trouble against when we fight this war, when we get involved, especially in 1964. So the VC promised to help the North fight those in the South, because the North's ultimate goal is to spread communism throughout both countries and completely take over and unite Vietnam as one country again. So how do they do this? They create what's called the Ho Chi Minh Trail, which, as you can see over here with this map, it has different areas where they infiltrate through Laos and Cambodia into Vietnam, where they can send supplies to help the Viet Cong fight for the North. When JFK was president, he had to decide what he wanted to do with the situation in Vietnam. And as we know, JFK was kind of a pacifist. He didn't really want to have any type of war, so he sent advisors down there. Now, General Taylor and Vice President Johnson went on a fact-finding mission, and they felt that there needed to be additional troops there. But Kennedy said no, and Kennedy felt it was vital to at least help them out because he felt that Vietnam was the cornerstone of the free world. So Diem was having some major trouble in his country. This was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back with his leadership in South Vietnam. Monks, Buddhist monks in protest started to light themselves on fire because they were so upset with Diem's leadership of the area. So people started to have their eyes open and realize that this was bad, that he was a bad leader, that people were willing to sacrifice themselves like this. And not only that, he was losing support. At the same time, the VC was gaining support from those in South Vietnam. So Kennedy realized that something needed to be done. JFK agreed to booting Diem out of office, but he felt like we were going to remove him. But eventually, on November 1st, 1963, he was executed instead. JFK wasn't really happy about this, but their goal was met, their objective was met by getting him out of office. So for a little while, the commander of Vietnam was General William Westmoreland from the United States. Exactly 3 weeks after Diem was executed, so unfortunately was JFK, and to immediately take over his position was Lyndon B. Johnson, LBJ, and he wanted to immediately escalate the war. And not only that, his Secretary of Defense, Robert McNamara, agreed that we should be sending in more troops to Vietnam as well. In August of 1964, LBJ took a situation to his advantage in order to escalate troops in Vietnam. In the Gulf of Tonkin, which is right off the coast of Vietnam, the USS Maddox was attacked by North Vietnamese torpedo boats. And then a few hours later, the ship, the Sea Turner Joy, was also supposedly attacked as well. And that was LBJ's green light to ask Congress to go to war. The Vietnam War was never a declared war. To be an officially declared war, the Senate would have to have a 2/3 majority vote in order for it to be an official war. Instead, it was given to LBJ the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, which allowed him to basically have a blank check to do whatever he wanted over in Vietnam. So he escalated the number of troops, and one of the first missions that they had over in Vietnam was Operation Flaming Dart, which used B-52 bombers to bomb Vietnam. And we're going to see that the use of bombing from airplanes is used a lot in this war. Probably the most well-known operation to go on in Vietnam was Operation Rolling Thunder, which was just a constant bombardment of North Vietnam using bombs. And their main target was the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Why? Well, because of the fact that that's where the Viet Cong got most of their supplies. And if you cut off their supply line, how are they going to be able to fight you? In 1965, the war begins to escalate. By that time, 200,000 troops had been sent to Vietnam to fight. In 1967, we also see an escalation on the attack of the Viet Cong with Operation Cedar Falls, where we start to attack the Viet Cong headquarters. How do we know about this? Well, we started to discover while making these attacks massive tunnel complexes that the Vietnam had created underneath the ground. And how did we find those? We would send in what were called nicknamed tunnel rats, which would be men responsible for diving into these VC tunnels to either root them out or to throw in grenades or bombs or whatever. Above me, you will see an actual drawing of the tunnel system. There's a lot of things there: bunkers for them to sleep in, areas for them to plan in, a kitchen, a well, and they also have different areas that are for traps to trap the enemy in. And then to the side of me, you will also notice that this is an example of a tunnel rat, someone who had to actually go down into the tunnels to look for the Viet Cong. The turning point of the Vietnam War was the Tet Offensive. It had occurred on January 31st, 1968. That was their New Year's, where the Viet Cong, the VC, attacked several different cities in South Vietnam by using a surprise attack, their guerrilla warfare that they are known for doing. Why was this a turning point? There were several reasons, but one of the reasons that upset so many Americans with this, that kind of decreased our morale, was the fact that they took over the American embassy in Saigon, killing 5 Americans. So there are several reasons why the Tet Offensive was the turning point of the war. The first one was that even though it was a military win, psychologically it was a huge loss for the soldiers. Also, at the time, the American public thought that we were winning the war, when in fact they saw what happened at the U.S. Embassy. They just automatically assumed that we weren't doing as well as all of our military personnel was telling us on television. Some other reasons that the Tet Offensive was the turning point for the war was because we saw the credibility gap widen even further, which is basically the trust that Americans had in the government was starting to decrease. President Johnson also said that he would halt bombing in northern Vietnam, and it wasn't true. He was lying about that, and that upset Americans again. It caused a further divide in the credibility gap. Also, at this time, we're also going to see President Johnson refusing to run for re-election in the 1968 elections. We have done a lot of atrocious things in our history, and this has to definitely be in the top 5 worst things that Americans have ever done. That it's one of those things in history we really don't want to remember or talk about because it's pretty embarrassing. This is the events at the area village called My Lai. This happened in 1968, March 16th, where a Charlie company of U.S. troops was going into the village of My Lai with Lieutenant William Calley. And basically they were supposed to be on a find and search and destroy mission where they would find Charlie being the enemy, the Viet Cong, and weed them out. At My Lai, the U.S. soldiers killed 300 civilians, Vietnamese civilians. Most of them were women and children and the elderly. Before that, unfortunately, many of the soldiers, before they killed these women and children, raped the women, and it was just a completely brutal, atrocious event that happened in American history. Officer Hugh Thompson was actually a pilot during this time, and he was the one that's going to report the killings to U.S. headquarters, that the people aren't going to get away with it. 2 years after the event happened, Robert Haberly, who was a photographer with the group at My Lai, took photos of it and released it to the public. And because of this event was the one that got a lot of the soldiers labeled as baby killers. When they would come home, typically there weren't the big parades for them, everybody excited to see them. They were basically spit at, had things thrown at them, and they were called baby killers just because of this one event that most of the soldiers obviously were involved in. The Americans tried to go for a new strategy, which was to win the battle of the hearts and minds of the people, not only the Americans back home, but more importantly, the South Vietnamese. And how were they going to do that? By completely attacking the Viet Cong. And they did that with one of 2 new, pretty much biological weapons and chemical weapons. The first was napalm, which is a gasoline-based bomb that was used to destroy Viet Cong headquarters, and also to set the jungle on fire, to kind of weed them out of the jungles or just to kill them. Another thing that was used, another type of weapon that was used during this time was Agent Orange. And what that was a chemical-based weapon that was dumped all over Vietnam that was meant to basically kill any type of Viet Cong, but it had many lasting effects, not only on the South Vietnamese, but also on U.S. soldiers. And some of the pictures that you are going to see in these next few slides show the effects of Agent Orange and how it gave tumors, cancer to many people in South Vietnam. So I'm just going to forewarn you, these next pictures that you're about to see are very disturbing. We, as a result of the Battle of the Hearts and Minds, to win the hearts and minds of the South Vietnamese, it was an epic failure. We did not win the heart and minds of them. First of all, you could see the pictures of what we did to them, which was atrocious. Why did we not win the hearts and minds of these people? Well, number one, we burnt down all their villages with napalm. We were trying to set the jungles on fire, but guess what? We also burned down their homes and villages as well. Also, by doing that, not only that, but with Agent Orange, many of their livestock, the way that they actually could make money or trade for food, it was killed as well, and the chemicals are going to give them long-lasting diseases, birth defects, and cancer, like I just showed you with the pictures from the previous slides. There were a lot of people that were against the Vietnam War, and this was known as the anti-war movement. This is when we start seeing the beginning of the counterculture. Now, the counterculture only lasted basically the summer of 1969, but it was a term used that referred to those who went against the traditional values and norms of American society. They were against the establishment, as they call it, the government, large corporations, etc. They basically wanted to live communal style on their own. They felt like they didn't have to, pay for anything. They would just do drugs and not even worry about what was going on in the world. But there were some people who were just regular anti-war people who were protesting against the war, and majority of them we saw were typical middle-class white college students. The names given to those who were for and against the war were war hawks and war doves. War hawks were the ones that were for the war and for war involvement, and war doves were the ones who wanted peace and were against the war. Those are still terms that are used today to describe people who are for and against war in general. Another reason that so many were against the war was because of the draft, because of the fact that men were forced to fight and even die sometimes for their country when they didn't want to do it in the first place. So let's say you didn't want to fight in this war. How do you get out of it? There are definitely several different ways that they could do that. Number one were conscientious objectors, who would say that they didn't want to fight in the war for religious beliefs. Someone who tried to do this but didn't get away with this was Muhammad Ali, also known as Cassius Clay. He tried to say that he didn't want to fight in the war because it was against his belief in Islam, and he got thrown into jail and his title stripped from him, his world heavyweight championship boxing title stripped from him for 7 years because he tried to use the idea of being a conscientious objector, and they refused to let him do it. There were also people who got determinants, which were basically delayed entrance because they couldn't do one thing or another. They were in college, but most people who got determinants were upper class, rich people. Or they would just dodge the draft. They would flee to Canada and try to get out of it that way. The largest and most popular group in the anti-war movement was the SDS, the Students for a Democratic Society. They started out in Berkeley, California, at the University of California, Berkeley, and they were college students who just wanted an end to the war. Now, at first, they were demonstrating against the administration, what they felt wasn't fair, but then it became a national group once they united under the front that they did not want the Vietnam War to happen and that they wanted it to end. So one thing that they went after were the ROTC groups at college campuses. Sometimes they would even go as extreme as burning them down. One of the most unfortunate and deadly protests happened at Kent State University in May of 1970. Kent State is in Ohio, and students were upset there because Nixon had been bombing Cambodia. And why were they upset about that? Because of the fact that they were afraid that, great, Nixon said he was going to end this war, and now he's bombing the country next to them, and they're going to get mad at us and want to escalate the war as well. So students started to burn down the ROTC building. Because of what was happening with the burning of the ROTC building at Kent State University, the governor of Ohio took an extreme measure and imposed martial law on the area, which basically is when the military takes over a civilian area. It was done, it's usually done in wartime, and this is a case of that where there's civil unrest and threats to certain people's lives and authorities, so that's why they had martial law imposed on this area. 10 soldiers and Nixon coming, we're finally on our own. This summer I hear the drumming, 4 dead in Ohio. When Nixon ran for president in 1968 and won, he had promised to bring the boys home from war, and he said he represented the silent majority, which means most people who felt a certain way, they just never really spoke up about it. Well, that's how he got into office, and as you can see, people were really upset that he pretty much reneged on what he was planning on doing and increased the bombing in northern Vietnam, and as we were talking about with the Kent State protesting, in Cambodia as well. When Nixon said that he was going to bring the boys home from war, it was through his plan of vietnamization, which basically was his gradual withdrawal of troops from Vietnam, and to be able to do that when they felt comfortable with the army of South Vietnamese being able to take care of themselves. And he did say that they would cease bombing, but that really wasn't the truth, because with Operation Linebacker, that's when he was bombing Cambodia. Now, why was he bombing Cambodia? Think back to the Ho Chi Minh Trail. It had lines through the country of Cambodia and Laos, and that's what he was trying to get to. Not necessarily, oh, hey, let's just bomb Cambodia because they're just right there, but it was to get to the Ho Chi Minh line to cut the supplies to the Viet Cong. Nixon was very good with his words, and one of the ways that he phrased his belief on Vietnam was to have peace with honor. So basically, if you really dig down and read between the lines of that, yes, he wanted peace, yes, he wanted to get out, but he wasn't just going to pull out the troops and make us look bad. He wanted to do it with honor. So that was his way of saying, yes, I definitely want peace, but at the same time, I'm not going to do this and make us look bad. During the war, there are many POWs, or prisoner of wars, taken captured by the North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong. But we went to try to get them back because, you know, if you're ever a prisoner of war, you're supposed to be treated respectfully and treated well. But the prisoners of war, the American prisoners of war, were treated brutally by the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese. So we pushed through an Operation Homecoming in 1973, where we were able to go after and get 591 of the 2,000 reported POWs back home. This map right here shows the major camps for POWs that the Viet Minh and the Viet Cong created for the Americans. You can see that there's the Alcatraz Zoo, Hilton Plantation, and the Dirty Bird, the zoo being considered the most brutal of them all, not that any of them were great. If you're interested in learning about Vietnam POWs, the most famous of all those would be Senator John McCain, who ran for president in 2008 against Barack Obama. It got to the point where we were starting to evacuate any and all soldiers we possibly can, including some Southern Vietnamese who wanted to take refuge in the United States. So with Operation Frequent Wind, this was considered one of the largest evacuations of all time of both Americans and Southern Vietnamese. It was an amazing sight. We were trying to get as many people on naval ships as we possibly could. They would use helicopters to fly them to the naval ships, and it was so overcrowded that they were shoving off helicopters into the Pacific Ocean just to make room for people to actually be on these ships. And then unfortunately, on April 30th, 1975, Saigon, the capital city of South Vietnam, fell to the North Vietnamese, and it became one country, one communist country. So our mission to contain communism had failed. At the beginning, I showed you some numbers of the Vietnam War, but now I'm going to show you some policy changes because of the Vietnam War and because of the abuse of power in the executive branch. Congress passed the Wars Power Act in 1973, which basically was a resolution that limited the president's power of what they could do in war. If it wasn't a declared war, Congress had the right to completely cease that war in 60 days after any type of skirmish had started, and the president had to give Congress at least a 48-hour window before he would actually send anybody into action. Also, in 1971, the 26th Amendment was passed that allowed 18-year-olds to vote. They used the rationale, if they can die for their country at 18, they should be able to vote for their country at the age of 18, not 21 like it used to be. That's it for the Vietnam War presentation. As you can see, I'm leaving you with a picture of the Vietnam War Memorial in Washington, D.C. Those words that are etched on that wall are all the soldiers that fell during the war. Have a good night.